It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
We have with us tonight a special guest, Leonard Ulrich. The website is nwotruth.org, and you might know him from these videos that he does, which are very, very well produced and get a lot of plays on YouTube. Leonard, are you there?
I am.
So nice to meet you, my friend. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we've been chatting off the air. It's so phony, you know, when you get on the air. It's so hard for me to do that. Yesterday I was interviewing somebody. We were talking like 20 minutes before the show started, and then you start all over like we're acting. So, Leonard, tell us about yourself. Who is Leonard Ulrich?
Well, Leonard Ulrich is just your average person with a set of skills that have been developed over 20 years. I was still am a certified teacher. I got my B.Ed in 91, a B.A. in 92, and I taught history as well as other subjects in public and private schools for 7 years. I have a double major in Western history and a GPA of about 3.8. I graduated from high school with honors, 92% in history. So I can state categorically that I've always been historically minded. Names, dates, faces, places have always come easily to me. And basically, my entire paradigm changed in June 2005 when I was just surfing on the internet. And I came across some entry on 9/11. And I thought, well, this will be easy to debunk. And I went down the rabbit hole, as it were. And I went down that path thinking I could easily refute these arguments. After all, you know, I've got this double major in history. I've turned down 2 opportunities to get my master's. I didn't think it would be of any use. And basically, my love of history and my love of Bible prophecy were fused together in an attempt to debunk 9/11 and a myriad of other subjects, so that basically over about a 25-year period, I can state without any reservation that evil is organized. And if you forget everything else that we've said tonight, except for those 3 words, evil is organized, then you'll be getting more of an education than if you went to university for 3, 4, or 8 years with 3 pieces of paper like I have.
Very interesting way to put it. Evil is organized. Okay. Now, what is your faith?
I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and I also am an awake Christian. And I need to qualify that carefully. I don't want to imply in any way that I have a superior intellect to anyone else, especially my brothers and sisters. But I will say this. The vast majority of people, and especially Bible-believing Christians, say they want to know what's going on in the world, except when you confront them with cold, hard facts. Then they are willfully ignorant about how the world really works. They just want to turn on their TV, pop back a beer, and relax.
I'll take the beer part. I can't know about the TV. Now, I'm a Bible-believing Christian myself. And I guess I'm in a church now that's non-denominational, but I got saved in the Assemblies of God church, and all my family's still in there now, and I still got a lot of good friends in there, and I'm a Pentecostal. Do you have a denomination? You're non-denominational? What is?
I actually almost refuse to get into the denominational game because what I believe may not necessarily be what somebody believes in the same pew, in the same church, right? I just call myself a follower of Christ.
Now, with this research you've been doing and what you've come to believe about the way the world operates and the way the world runs, Do you find any kind of a reception to that philosophy in your church? I know.
You're asking a very dangerous question.
Okay.
I'll answer it this way. I'm going to be like a politician. It's a political season in America, obviously. So I will answer the question this way, and it's a very good question. I have nearly 10,000 subscribers and over 6 million views, but I can't show my film in my own church.
I can sympathize with you, you know, and especially like a lot of the stuff we do here on this show is, you know, we expose satanic cults and pedophilia rings and, you know, in the highest places, you know, and it's unwelcome in the church here in America, at least at the churches that I visit, most of them. I know some pastors and some evangelists who are tuned into what I'm saying and agree. But for the most part, if you walk into a church here in America and you start talking about these things, they look at you like you have two heads.
Yeah, exactly. But the good news is this. I have been contacted by dozens of pastors and seminary students all over the world, and they all tell me the same thing. Can you generalize and dumb down your message to, you know, an acceptable point where I can show your material in my church? And I say, would Jesus do that? You know, I think Jesus said, I'm sending you out like sheep among nice people. You must be as wise as serpents and gentle as doves. No, he didn't say nice people. He said wolves. Okay, the wolves existed then, 2,000 years ago. They exist now. They just put on a sheep's clothing.
So then, when you see like these right-wing Republicans who have sort of hijacked Christianity, you know, the moral majority, and they want we have to salute the flag in church, which is a total turnoff to me to begin with. But do you think that's you would believe your thesis is that that's by design?
Absolutely. Look, there are 1,000 ways to go wrong in the Christian faith. And Dominionism, which is what you were referring to, is one of them. Dominionism is a subset, a heresy, as far as I'm concerned, of what I would call military Christianity. In other words, might is right, and God is on our side because we have might, therefore we are right. And I would say, well, that's not what Jesus would say. He would say, turn the other cheek.
Okay, very good. Now how would you, because you said that pastors come to you and they say, hey, can you whittle it down to a nutshell of what your theory is here? Can you start with that?
Sure thing. There's going to be a series, Lord willing, of 4 films. I'm neck deep in the second film called The Illusion of Money. And all 4 films have the same 3 points. And those 3 points are this. Most of the evil in this world is highly coordinated and is fulfilling biblical prophecy to the letter. Point number 2 of 3 is this. Historical and current events are being influenced by evil to make the appearance of the Antichrist highly probable within a generation. And the final point is that though the world is not yet in an apocalyptic state, the forces of organized evil affect us all now and must be resisted like never before. And those 3 points apply to just about every situation that we can come across.
Now, that's interesting. Because now you have folks like Pat Robertson, right, who feel that they can legislate morality and we can hold off the coming of the Antichrist, that we can somehow legislate. You know, we can create laws to prevent this. Now, that's one end of it. But now, do you believe also that these forces of evil, as you describe them, are creating conditions to bring on the entrance of the Antichrist?
To answer your 2 questions, no and yes. Now, let's unpack that.
Okay.
You referenced Pat Robertson. Okay, passing legislation to enforce morality is exactly what is happening in about 24 Islamic countries.
All right.
And it's not working. And point number 2, I would say, Mr. Robertson, if I had a chance to speak with him, I would say the reason why you are tempted to pass legislation to enforce morality is because you have failed in your responsibility as a Christian leader to increase the influence of Christianity on society so that you prefer an external control model as opposed to an internal individual control model. And the former never works, and it is only when a nation or an empire is in crisis that the latter, which is the genuine article, ever works. And more specifically, if you look at every single empire in the entire history of the planet, whether it be the Sumerians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Medo-Persians, Greco-Romans, any society has an average lifespan of 238 years. Guess how old America is?
That's interesting. That's right. Just about 230 years, yeah.
238 is the statistical average. Obviously, some empires last longer. Obviously, some empires last, less long. But that is the average. And that is because every society goes through a couple of phases. You can call it spring, summer, fall, and winter. And right now, America is somewhere between late fall and early winter.
Okay, are we there?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I was fooling around with my headset. Okay, good. Okay, now, and what about the part about these forces of evil as you describe them? Are they trying to bring on the coming of the Antichrist? Or yeah, let's start with that. Are they trying to bring on the coming of the Antichrist?
Yes, they always have tried to bring on the appearance of the Antichrist. They never rest. They never take a break. And I find it absolutely shocking that right now, under the auspices of the UNESCO, which is obviously United Nations Front organization, which was started and funded by the Rockefellers, at least two, and preferably, as far as the globalists are concerned, preferably after that, hundreds of replicas of the Temple of Baal will be going up, starting in New York, in Times Square, and in London, in Trafalgar Square. And if you and your listeners don't know anything about the Temple of Baal, well, then let me fill you in. The entire Old Testament, including some references in the New Testament, is about avoiding or coming out of Baal worship. And what is Baal worship? Well, it's pure Luciferianism, pure Satanism. Three things mark the acts of worship in the Temple of Baal: kinky sex, abuse, as in cutting of oneself, whatever designed to, quote unquote, enhance the human experience, as in taking drugs, whatever, to, quote unquote, commune with the other side, and child sacrifice in order to appease Baal. So kinky sex, drugs and all kinds of abuse, and child sacrifice. And this is what UNESCO is trying to replicate. You can try to fool the population by saying, well, we're just recreating a World Heritage Site, just replicating it from what ISIS destroyed in the middle of Syria. And so in defiance of ISIS, we're going to replicate a World Heritage landmark. Well, that's fine, but please tell the population what that World Heritage landmark was all about. But they're not going to do that. Okay, they're going to influence the world to accept these ancient temples, and through other means of influence, such as TV shows like Lucifer, they are just acclimatizing the world to all kinds of evil, as in kinky sex, abuse, and child sacrifice. So to answer your question directly, yes, there are always people trying to influence the world towards evil.
You know, it's terrifying what you just said. Now, you're saying that UNESCO, and what is UNESCO exactly? It's a UN organization, but what is it exactly?
The United Nations Educational and Scientific Organization, UNESCO.
Okay. And you're saying that they have a plan to replicate 150 of these temples of Baal, you said?
Well, they're starting with 2.
Okay.
And if they're accepted by the dumb masses, quote unquote, then they will, as far as they're concerned, they will erect hundreds of these around the world. I mean, that's their objective.
They have that as a stated plan.
Yes. Many are of the opinion that this is, designed to improve the culture around the world, because as far as they're concerned, in their own literature, they will tell you that the temples of Baal were necessary to secure the power of the elite who could philosophize and optimize society. That's how they spin it.
Get out of here.
I'm not joking. Of course, this is a generalization, a paraphrase of their own literature, but you will find that to be at least in context.
And you're saying that there's going to be one in New York City?
Yes, it's going to be erected on, I believe, April 19th, which is the start of a high holy season for Satanism. And let me back up here. Yeah. Everything that you see as far as major events are concerned is designed, calculated, and presented in a way that reinforces occult ideology. Because the people who do these things are all into quote-unquote sacred chronology and quote-unquote sacred geometry. They believe that if they can enforce their will on society according to these pathological methods, that they reinforce their own will upon society, and that if the general society is dumb enough to accept their influence on the world without detection, then the dumb sheeple, as far as they're concerned, deserve to be sheared. For example, the Brussels bombing. What was the numerological date of that bombing?
I don't know. What was it?
322.
That's right. I remember that now.
That's right. And what is the Illuminati chapter of Skull and Bones in America? What is that, the number?
Yeah, 322, yeah.
322. Okay. On the cover of The Economist, last year's cover, I believe, published in December 2015, The Economist had a cover shot of the world in 2015. And it would take me about 20 to 25 minutes to unpack just that cover image at a breakneck speed. I don't know if I could possibly do it. Just one image, a composite image of that cover of The Economist magazine, The World in 2015. Published in December 2014, obviously. And at the bottom right-hand corner, you saw 2 arrows. And the reference numbers were a jumbled date setting of the Paris attacks, of multiple attacks in Paris. So I knew something was up around November, but I couldn't decode it because it was scrambled according to their numerology.
I'm familiar with the cover you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you're right. There's a lot of strange imagery on that cover, without a doubt. Now, you describe how they use numerology. They use certain dates. They use sacred geometry, certain locations and stuff. They use blood sacrifice. They use, there seems to be a big focus too on pedophilia, child molestation, trauma in children. Now, they believe that they're getting power from this, correct?
That is correct. That is why Mr. Epstein can have Orgy Island in the middle of the Caribbean, and major politicians of all stripes will visit that island, including Donald Trump and including Bill Clinton.
Right. I understand that. But do you believe they get power from that?
In a word, yes.
Me too. Okay.
Because what they are doing is, how do I possibly explain this? Okay. It is the reverse of what is well and good according to the Bible. You see, the only way you can truly understand evil is to take all the patterns and historical landmarks within the Bible and reverse them 180.0 degrees. Then you can understand how evil works. For example, the 12 disciples and met in the upper room, of course, with Jesus. And Jesus was their leader, and he had a 3.5-year mission to ensure the salvation of humanity. Well, back in 1776, Adam Weishaupt had 12 disciples, and he engaged on an absolutely evil plan because he was steeped in the occult. We could get into how that was a little later on. And out of the so-called Enlightenment, which is a rejection of all authority, he basically secularized and encoded all the rules necessary to transform what was a Christian society, at least in the Western world, into an atheistic, secular society, which is exactly where we are now, with a few exceptions, such as a few pockets of Christianity in the Western world. So basically, Jesus had his plan, and evil people like Adam Weishaupt had his plan. You cannot tell me for 1 second that Adam Weishaupt accidentally came across all these things and unintentionally influenced major people throughout Western Europe to do what they did. I mean, history doesn't just happen. It is made to happen by people who are under the influence of Satan, not because I say so, but because they say so. They openly talk about Lucifer. You know, so if you're an atheist or an agnostic listening to me tonight, then you're going to have to explain that to yourself. How is it that these major people who talk about Lucifer, like Tony Blair, came out in the London Daily Mail, you know, he goes through epileptic fits and feels the seething power of Lucifer, and that's what energizes him. And him and his New Age wife, Cherie Blair, visited the Aztec ruins and, felt re-energized upon their visit. I mean, you cannot make this up. So they're the ones saying this. I'm not saying this.
Right. And we see the Clintons going to Africa at Mandela's funeral, and they're drinking that stuff. They're involved in those ceremonies over there, drinking blood and human tissue. And they did it down in Haiti, too, as well.
You know, the Clintons are a classic case of what I call deception of the third order.
Okay.
You can get into 3 layers of deception. You and I have met people who lie, and they know they're lying, and you know they're lying.
Right.
Therefore, they can't pull the wool over your eyes. Then there is someone, what I call I'll call that those who attempt deception. Let's just call it that. Then there's a second order, which is someone who is a quote-unquote true believer. They lie, or they package and present events or complex forces in such a way as to get you to believe the wrong thing because they, quote-unquote, are doing it for the right reasons. In other words, they're doing the wrong thing. They know they're doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. That's, the deception of the second order. Then there's the deception of the third order, where people believe their own lies, even though they contradict themselves. And I think the Clintons are people who are, deceivers of the third order. They lie and they believe their own contradictory statements.
Okay, but I believe there's a group of people that can lie and get people. They have some kind of demonic power. People believe their lies, and they can also get other people to lie for them.
That is correct. Adolf Hitler is a beautiful example. I wouldn't say beautiful. Yeah. Is a wonderful example of this. You can go on the internet and you can get access to photographs of Hitler practicing public persuasion. In other words, the hand gestures, the inflections of voice, the timing, the delivery, the stance, it's all calculated. And I believe it was, ironically, a Jewish sociologist who taught Hitler how to speak. So on the surface, there are certain techniques of persuasion, but I don't look at the superficial level. I try to see things through the spiritual perspective, through biblical perspective. So I dig and I dig and I dig, and I realize that Hitler's mother worked for a Rothschild.
Right.
And we have reason to believe that basically Hitler was a Rothschild bastard, because she suddenly withdrew from being a maid in a Rothschild castle, and suddenly married Hitler's father and had Adolf Hitler. And we can't verify that Adolf Hitler is a Rothschild bastard, because one of the first things Adolf Hitler did as leader of Germany, after he torched the Parliament building in Germany, was destroy the records of the town that he grew up in. Now, why would you do that unless you had something to hide? So we know Adolf Hitler had a Jewish grandmother. We have every reason to believe that Adolf Hitler is a Rothschild bastard. Now, here's where it gets scriptural. The Bible talks about familiar spirits. Right. It talks about evil being passed on to the second and third generation. The Rothschilds are absolutely steeped in occult theology and occult techniques. I mean, Eyes Wide Shut is exactly what they do. And I will show people in my second film, The Illusion of Money, which is what I'm working on right now, pictures of a 1973 Rothschild ball. The invitations were written in reverse writing.
I've seen those pictures, but Salvador Dali pretty much produced the whole thing.
That is correct.
Right.
Now, you can say, well, it was a fancy ball featuring modern art, but I don't know if severed doll heads qualify as modern art centerpieces. And I don't know if goats' heads qualify as, modern art. And I don't know if Baphomet necklaces qualify as modern art. I mean, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it just might be a duck. If it looks like evil, it might be evil.
It's extremely disturbing images. I know exactly what you're talking about. We're going to take a commercial break. We're with Leonard Ulrich, his website is nwotruth.org. This audience should really be into all this stuff. He's done some incredible YouTube videos. Check him out. It's like 2-hour-long videos, and it's under the name Leonard Ulrich. We'll be right back after these messages. Now, I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but every time you start talking, I have another question. I can't help it, okay? And you remind me of a professor. You're like, I like your style, the way you do this,
Well, God led me down a particular path for 20 years. to become what I am today and with the skill set that I have. And it's not every day where you meet someone who's historically minded, who's well-spoken, and is comfortable with technology.
Very true. How old are you?
I'm 46.
46 years. Okay. Now, you were talking about how these forces of evil, they'll take things that are good. Like they'll take the blood of Jesus and they'll do their own blood sacrifices to like pervert and the opposite. Now, what about the state of Israel? Because now, obviously, you know, in the Old Testament says that these are God's chosen people and stuff like that. Now, how does that hash out in your theory?
Okay, first of all, we need to define the Overton window when it comes to Israel. And with that, I mean, we need to define the boundaries of our discussion in regards to Israel, because it is such a thorny issue.
Right.
So let me say first that I believe that Israel is God's chosen people. I believe that the modern recreation of the state of Israel in May 1948 is part of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And I reject replacement theology, which is the idea that the Christian church has somehow replaced Israel as God's chosen people. Having said that, I will tell you, and this is where I lose a huge part of my audience, that there are individuals and forces within Israel that are absolutely anti-Christian. And in case people's, eyes start to bulge out of their skulls, keep in mind that Jesus met Zionists, and we need to define that term, in the form of the Jewish elite, the scribes and the Pharisees. And if you don't like what I'm saying about some of the Jewish elite, then you won't certainly like what Jesus said about the Jewish elite of his time. And he called them snakes, spawn of Satan. And the Jewish elite came up to Jesus one day and said, well, we have Abraham as our father. And Jesus looks at him and says, you say we have Abraham as our father. I say you are of your father, the devil. In other words, Jesus addressed the issue of social Zionism head on and rejected it. Now we need to define what social Zionism is. Social Zionism is the belief that if you are of a certain lineage, then that makes you next to God. And I could qualify that statement by reading off a whole long list of verified quotes. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way for 1 second that this is what all of Israel or all Jews in the world believe. I will state that this is what some Jews believe, not because I say so, but because they say so. Now, I could deliver you all kinds of quotes about how certain Americans believe that that because they are Americans, that they are superior to the rest of the world. And that does not make me anti-American. So I would hope that people who are listening to me right now, who I could quote at length about how some Israelis, some Jews believe that they are superior to everyone else, would call me anti-Semitic. That's not my deal, okay? So just because I quote some Jews and of what they believe, it's not about what I believe, it's about what they believe, does not mean I wish to tar and feather all Jews or all Americans or any other group. Having said that, there are objective studies such as the works of the book of professors Walt and Mearsheimer called The Israeli Lobby. I suggest people read that. And their main conclusion is that Jews in America, who represent 7% of the American population, are responsible for 54% of all political donations. Now, that is a huge power base. And so, long story short, there were occultists within the Jewish faith who specifically had the recreation of Israel in mind. We can trace that back, about 300 years to people like Shabbatai Tzvi, a Jewish heretical figure, historical figure, and the Frankists, and we can bring in the Rothschilds, and 31 years to be more precise, before the modern recreation of Israel in 1948, a member of the World Zionist Federation wrote a letter to Arthur James Balfour. And this letter talked about the recreation of the modern state of Israel in Palestine. And that Mr. Balfour, who incidentally drew all these straight lines that you see between the nations in the Middle East, very specifically to maximize the conflict between tribal areas within the Middle East, so as to keep the Middle East in a state of turmoil so that the Middle East would not advance. And this letter on behalf of the World Zionist Federation, addressed to the individual that I just mentioned, whose name I forgot, Arthur James Balfour, was written by Mr. Rothschild himself, 31 years before the state of Israel was created. And you can see how the Rothschilds were funding Zionism from the days of the Frankists onwards through Jewish heresy. And you can see how they funded major Jewish researchers, like the researcher that created or wrote the Jewish state in the 1880s. And basically, I find it fascinating how evil is God's tool, because ultimately, evil is going to behave in a certain way that God anticipated. For example, the Zionists back in the early 1900s were pining for the state of Israel to be in Uganda, of all places. And that obviously didn't happen. Obviously, Israel was recreated according to their ancient homelands. And so I see that as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So the bottom line is that evil can occur in any group. It can occur within American Christians. It can occur within American Jews. It can occur within Israeli populations. That does not mean that we should generalize an entire group of people, but we must recognize the forces of evil that are at work in every single subset of the population, not because I say so, but because the Bible says so, in that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Okay,
but you have those, like Ted Cruz, will say to you, like another Canadian like yourself, Ted Cruz, will say, well, you know, the Bible says that God says that he will bless those who bless Israel. So therefore, therefore they can do no wrong.
Well, would Jesus have said that?
My question is, what I've always turned to is Solomon. Toward the end of Solomon's life, he had erected all those Asherah poles and stuff like that. And God obviously was not blessing him or Israel at that time, was he?
Absolutely not. Solomon recreated the temple of Baal inside the Holy of Holies.
Right.
I mean, of all the ways to tick God off, I mean, he went all the way. And of course, you know what happened to the people of Israel. Because of the leadership of Israel's disobedience, the entire population of Israel suffered.
Right. So God has not always blessed Israel.
No, and it's so fascinating to me as a historian, as a Bible believer, to see how God used other nations surrounding Israel repeatedly to chasten Israel, and then basically allowed those other nations, other empires to be conquered in response for chastening Israel.
And now we have, in the end times, when the Antichrist comes, his throne will be in the temple in Israel.
That is correct.
So can we say that by the U.S. funding Israel and letting them do whatever they want, that we are building the throne of the Antichrist?
No, we can't say that.
Okay, go ahead.
You can provide somebody with a gun and ammunition for self-protection, but that second party is free to use that gun and that ammunition in an incorrect way.
Okay, so now, and when I was watching your video today, I was concerned that you might be an anti-Semite, you know? And you get that accusation a lot?
Yes, I do. And my response is always the same. I simply quote Revelation 2, verse 9, and Revelation 3, verse 9. And for those of you who don't know anything about the book of Revelation, it starts off in chapters 2 and 3 with John's letters to the 7 churches that existed at the time. And those letters to the 7 churches, those greetings to the 7 churches, are not just literal greetings to literal churches. They are prophetic, future historical descriptions of the 7 periods of church history. And I find it fascinating as a historian to read those periods of future church history, and I hone in on Revelation 2, verse 9, and Revelation 3, verse 9, and I find it fascinating that it talks about those who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie, and are of the Synagogue of Satan, who are persecuting Christians. Now, this is what the Bible is saying, okay? And John, a former Jew, every single book of the Bible was written by a Jew, Old Testament and New Testament. Jesus was a Jew. He fulfilled all the requirements of Judaism. It's talking about future periods where a subset of Jews who are really purely evil, members of the Synagogue of Satan, of those who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie, will persecute Christians. And in Revelation 2, verse 9, you have a period of the early church history where the Jewish elite were persecuting Christians under Roman Emperor Diocletian. And I could break down, we don't really have a time right now, break down the 7 periods of church history and correlate that to periods of persecution of the church. But we would wind up with the last 2 periods, which is the Church of Philadelphia and the Church of Laodicea. I would argue that the Church of Laodicea's time period would be approximately mid-1700s to World War I. I'll make it World War II. The reason why I need to be a little bit vague is because you get into the matter of historiography, which is the interpretation of history. If you try to nail me down as far as dates of the start of the Industrial Revolution, I would have to ask you a few questions like, well, do you mean with the creation of the steam engine or the cotton ginny, or with 50% of the factories in America employing either the steam engine or the cotton ginny? In other words, there's a period of interpretation. Okay, so I would argue that the Church of Philadelphia lasted from about the mid-1700s to World War II, and the last church period, which is what we're in, which is the Church of Laodicea, started from 1945 to the present. And I find it fascinating that just as Revelation 2, verse 9 talked about an early church period in where the Jewish elite were using the power of the Roman Empire to persecute Christians, that in the time period of the mid-1700s to World War II, you also have a subset of the Jewish elite persecuting Christians. And I would target a certain handful of individuals to be the fulfillment of that Bible prophecy by the name of Karl Marx and the rest of the communist elite in Russia, because every single one of them had a quote-unquote Jewish background, like Katy Perry has a quote-unquote Christian background, but consciously, willingly, knowingly decided to serve Satan because their own writings said so. For example, Karl Marx. This is not going to be taught in any university or high school history course, but his real name was Moses Mordecai Levy. And Moses Mordecai Levy, obviously of Jewish background, wrote satanic poems like Hail Maiden. And one of the lines is, my soul, once true to God, is chosen for hell. Now, you can't get more blatant than that. Then we can turn our attention to other members of the quote-unquote Jewish communist Russian elite by the name of Lev Davidovich Bronstein, and we all know what his real name is, Leon Trotsky. And in his own book, My Life, he talks about a wealthy Jewish banker in New York funding the Russian Revolution. And that wealthy Jewish banker was Jacob Schiff. Then there are individuals within the Russian elite who are of a Jewish background who are responsible for the killing of over 20 million Christians, and you will never hear their name. And that is because much of the Jewish elite publishes the history textbooks. And I would be surprised if 1% of your audience would know of the name of Genrikh Yagoda. Genrikh Yagoda. He is, and I'm not joking now, the Jewish Hitler. He had the Hitler mustache. He was proud to be of Jewish extraction, and he presided over the Russian gulags. And his image and his name are pretty much erased from Russian history textbooks. And I was shocked that an Israeli journalist by the name of Sever Plocker, in an article called Stalin's Jews, detailed the involvement of the satanic portion of the Jewish elite in its fanatic persecution of Christians in that era. And I applaud Jewish journalists like Sever Plocker for having the courage to start this discussion. Because all we hear is 6 million Jews, 6 million Jews, 6 million Jews. But we never hear of 20 million Christians and 60 million Chinese.
Now I've heard that before, that Karl Marx's name was Mordecai Levy. Okay? Now,
Yeah.
But where do we have that documentation to trace that back and find that to be true?
There are certain articles. I can find links to them, historical articles from journals. They're very hard to find. And I referenced an article in the Jewish Post where, what's his name? Not Mr. Trotsky, but Lenin wrote a letter to his sister basically saying, don't spread the fact that we have a Jewish grandfather around. Okay?
Okay.
And Vladimir Lenin allowed for the existence of synagogues, and he was concerned about anti-Semitism, but of course he called religion the opiate of the masses and obviously persecuted Christians within the Russian Empire. So, once again, the Bible proves itself to be correct. And I'm not going to tar and feather all Jews that way. But when I look at certain powerful Jews within America and within Israel, I have to conclude by their own actions that they are members of the Synagogue of Satan. And for example, a USA Today poll about 2 years ago revealed that about 50% of all Jews within America self-describe as atheists. And they define atheism as either a severe doubt in the belief of God or a disbelief in the existence of God altogether. Imagine if a poll came out saying that half the Christians in America are self-described atheists. I mean, that would be totally bizarre. And yet the situation is tolerated amongst the 7% who describe themselves as Jews within America. And 50% of all the Jews in the world live either in America or Israel. So it's a very complex relationship between America and between Israel. And I, as a Christian, acknowledge that the modern recreation of Israel is a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And I understand that I, as a Christian, need to continue supporting Israel, irrespective of whether or not their ancestors have been, and some within that community continue to persecute Christians. Because in the end, God will deal with these individuals. It's not up to me to pass judgments. It is up to me to say, well, look, all this is happening. We need to acknowledge what has happened in the past. We need to acknowledge what is happening in the present. And we cannot accept every single thing that comes out of the mouths of the Jewish elite any more than Jesus accepted what came out of the mouths of the Jewish elite of his day.
Just to be clear, would you support the state of Israel right now, what they do with the Palestinians and Gaza and all that kind of stuff?
Oh, we could spend an hour and a half unpacking that. In a word, yes.
Really?
I need to qualify that.
Go ahead.
The question needs to be asked, whose land is it? Okay, and the Bible says that Jews will be regathered towards the time of the end in Israel in unbelief. It also says rhetorically, shall a nation be reborn overnight? And of course, we all know that the United Nations Declaration of May 1948 literally created Israel overnight as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. But you must also look at Israel through a spiritual lens. The conflict between Palestinians and Israelis is ultimately a demonic conflict. You have to ask yourself, why is it that Islamic nations surrounding Israel won't ever take in a single Palestinian refugee? And the answer is obvious. They want to keep the pressure cooker going. So yeah, you could say it's brutal, it's barbaric. Yes, you can make all those claims, but whose land ultimately is it? I would have to say that it's ultimately the Israelites. That is their chosen land, okay? And in case you doubt that, there is a brilliant geographical historical relationship between the Temple Mount and the rest of the planet. Now I need to unpack that. The distance in nautical miles between the center of the Temple Mount and the center of Babylon, I believe, I'm just going off my memory, is about 428 nautical miles. Well, it turns out that in 428 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was given a warning, and his nation, his empire was overthrown as a result of oppressing the Jews who fell into captivity because of their disbelief. So again, God is judging other nations for judging Israel. That's the way that you can see God's signature throughout history. Then fast forward thousands of years, and the center of London, as ironically defined by a Masonic obelisk in the heart of the city of London, as opposed to London proper, there are two cities in London, not just one. To the center of the Temple Mount is 1,948 nautical miles. Now, I asked anyone to look at those two facts and confirm them for themselves and say, is history just random, or is it being guided? And I would have to say it's being guided. So now back to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Bible also states that there are territorial demonic entities. For example, the Prince of Persia, the Spirit of the Nile. These are all demonic entities who are territorial. And one of those demonic entities happens to be in the middle of Palestine, which is exactly why there's so much conflict between that narrow strip of land and Israel. So the pressure cooker is geographically maintained by all these hypocritical Muslim nations not taking in a single Palestinian refugee. There are demonic forces involved because the Bible says so. And the conflict will continue because Israel will not be wiped off the map, but will actually expand its territory.
Okay, very good. Let's take a commercial break now. We're with Leonard Ulrich. His website is nwotruth.org. And we'll be right back after this with more of Leonard Ulrich. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Okay, now we're here with the Leonard Ulrich. His website is nwotruth.org. Now, I tell you, this is such a difficult topic to discuss because no one's happy. You know what I mean? Dude, no one. You don't make any friends having this discussion. But you know what? I could have been a coward and I brought it up, you know? But the thing is, and my own little difficulties I'm having with this show recently is I get from the one hand people saying that I'm afraid to bring up weird stuff. First of all, people accusing me of being a Zionist or accusing me of being Jewish. And then the other hand, they're saying, well, I don't bring up Jeffrey Epstein and his Jewish connections and stuff. And then I was accused of being an anti-Semite a couple of weeks back. And it's so incredibly frustrating. So I respect the fact that you're willing to talk about it. As uncomfortable as it is a topic, and how people seem to have such a knee-jerk reactions to it.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. I have been uninvited to speak at certain events because people look at my film for the first 5 minutes. They don't look at all of it, including my support for Israel at the end. And they draw conclusions based on a partial viewing of my films. And you're right, Mr. Opperman, nobody's happy.
Yeah.
That is why when I discuss the nature of Zionism, almost all of my sources are Jewish. So you cannot accuse me of promoting anti-Semitism. You can, for example, would it be a racist statement to say that most hockey players are white?
I don't watch hockey. No, I know what you're saying. Of course, they are most white. Yeah,
right. Would it be a racist statement to say that most basketball players are black?
Right.
Right. So don't inject your cultural biases into it. It's just stick to the facts.
And I'll even go one further. Sometimes when you're watching a boxing match, and there's one guy who's obviously very white and one guy who's obviously very black. The announcers are afraid to say that, and they'll describe the one with the trunks, and they're wearing almost identical trunks. The one with the pinstripe down his trunks. You know what I mean? To describe, they're afraid to say the white guy. You know, that Hagler is the black guy, or Boom Boom Mancini's the white guy. You know,
yeah,
just terrified to say these words. But I guess that's by design as well.
Yeah, for example, you asked me, can you confirm these sources about the members of a certain of the Russian communist elite having a Jewish background? And during the break, I did.
Okay.
For example, I can confirm through Alan Megel's work entitled "Karl Marx: The Burden of Reason, published in 2002, on page 72, that Karl Marx was born Herschel Mordecai, of his father, who was Marx Levy Mordecai. So yes, you can confirm that. It's a fact. It is also a fact that Genrikh Yagoda was the Jewish Hitler. And right now, I'm looking at an article from Jewish World by Dr. Rukama Weiss and Rabbi Levi Brockman. Okay, and if you don't like it, keep in mind that I'm referring to an article published in Israel by a Jewish doctor and a Jewish rabbi. Okay, and it says, Lenin's Jewish roots confirmed. Newly released letter written by Lenin's eldest sister reveals that their maternal grandfather was a Ukrainian Jew who converted to Christianity to escape the Pale of Settlement and gain access to higher education. And below the subheading, you see an article entitled Jewish Roots, and this is fascinating to me. As soon as we're done our discussion, I'm going to look at this article. DNA study, Hitler had Jewish roots. Belgian researchers examined DNA samples of 39 Hitler relatives, say he had Jewish, African roots. This is fascinating.
Yeah, very interesting, because there are Hitler relatives that are still alive walking around.
That's true. Yeah. And I believe, I think, I'd have to confirm this, so take this with a huge grain of salt. I think that there are genetic samples from Adolf Hitler still in storage.
Yeah, I don't know if I would trust that.
You see, that's where the huge grain of salt comes in.
Okay, now one more question too. Now, you had said that Jesus was Jewish. Now, I would say that Jesus is still Jewish.
That's correct.
Okay.
He fulfilled the law.
Right. Okay. Now, okay, let's do it. Now, what about
it's a thorny issue.
I know. The 6 million. The 6 million. Where do you stand on that?
I believe the number is false.
Okay.
However, as soon as you say that only 5,999,999 Jews died in the Holocaust, then you're instantly labeled as a Holocaust denier.
Right.
Okay? What is the truth? I can't tell you. Okay? But let's just accept the 6 million figure. By the way, there are historical references to the 6 million figure being created before World War II on behalf of Zionists. So you got to look at that 6 million figure with extreme doubt. And for example, at Treblinka, I believe, ground penetrating radar was used to do a soil structure sample at what everyone insists was a mass grave. And the ground penetrating radar indicates that the soil was undisturbed. Now, does this mean that not a single Jew died in World War II in the Nazi death camps? Of course not. It does cast doubt on that particular mass grave at Treblinka. However, my bottom line, Mr. Opperman, is this. Millions of Jews died in the Nazi death camps. That's absolute given. However, the number has been politicized so as to create, eventually, the State of Israel. For example, in the excellent work by Edwin Black, a Jewish historian, called The Transfer Agreement, you can see how the Zionists cooperated with the Nazi regime, and an exchange of money was made between the Zionists and the Nazis so as to create a pressure cooker situation to eventually result in the creation of a State of Israel. In other words, the Zionists were more than happy, more than willing to sacrifice their own people so that world sympathy towards the Jewish people in general would be increased and created, so that the state of Israel would eventually be created. I mean, you can't imagine a sicker thing. And yet, people can't believe that, but people can understand how the Dominionists in the Christian sect of America have no problem sending out Christians to reinforce the power of America in a very satanic way in regards to the lie of 9/11 and the lie of the war on terror, which has no end, and in order to extend American power. I find that the parallels between the two are almost indistinguishable.
Okay, then to move along, I guess to give fair equal time. What about the founding fathers of America? Now, there's this myth that these were Bible-believing Christians and that type.
Well, if you examine the writings of many of the founding fathers, you will soon conclude otherwise. For example, if you look under the writings of George Washington, and once you have access to academic sources, and you enter search terms like Jesus and Christianity and salvation and blood and communion, in other words, Christian words, you will find no hits. And if you look at the writings of certain quote-unquote progressives of their day, like, Thomas Jefferson, you will find him coming up with pretty shocking statements like it is as possible to separate fact from fiction in the Bible as to find diamonds in dunghills. So that pretty well kills the Christian myth that all the founding fathers were Christian. You see, Christian leaders in America have funded and encouraged a mythology just as Jewish leaders have funded and encouraged a Jewish mythology. That's not necessarily true. There's 1,000 holes in that mythology. And it all comes down to one thing: power.
Okay.
I understand it's a thorny, complex issue, but ultimately, evil is God's tool. Evil is expressing itself exactly in the way that the Bible says it would. So people who think they are in control ultimately are tools of their own pathology, and they're behaving in a way exactly like the Bible said they would.
Okay, now these forces of evil, is there a lineage from the Old Testament forces of evil until today? Is it the same group that's been in charge, controlling things from behind the scenes?
Yes and no. For example, the Roman army isn't being used to persecute Christians like it was. The Babylonians aren't persecuting the Jews today like they did back 2,400 years ago. Having said that, Satan always uses power centers of their time, including today, to enact his will. Satan has a will. Satan has a lot of power. It's no match for God, but you have to really read the Bible carefully to see what Satan can do. For example, when Satan tempted Jesus, one of the three temptations was that Jesus was taken up to a high vantage point, and the Bible says it's a mountain. It doesn't have to be a mountain. It could have been. And Satan showed him all the kingdoms of the world. Now, the only way for that piece of scripture to make any sense is if Satan had the ability to warp space and time as we know it and present Jesus with all the kingdoms of the world. And Satan said, all this will be yours if you just bow down and worship me. And what Satan was doing was presenting Jesus with an offer that was never his to offer. So Jesus rejected the offer, obviously. And so the third and final temptation was overcome by Jesus. And there have always been people who look at the Bible and in their sick pathology think they can outsmart God. So, for example, they look at the growing concentration of power within Israel, and they think they can outsmart everyone, including God, by front-running that power and using it for their own selfish purposes. You can't do that because ultimately God is in control. That doesn't mean that there aren't people, however, who aren't going to try this. And this is what we're seeing now.
We're seeing this now that they're trying to bring about the end times.
Yes, we started our conversation, amongst other topics, with the recreation of the Temple of Baal. I mean, really? I mean, what more do you want? Do we have to have human sacrifice, televised globally in order to say, what, society is pretty sick and twisted? By the way, that's coming, okay? This is just a taste of what's to come.
Yeah, I believe it's coming too. When you look at, I don't know if you're familiar with like the West Memphis 3 case.
I've heard of it. I haven't had time to study it.
Well, you got these young men, they're definitely into Crowley and all kinds of blood drinking and all kinds of stuff. And the main killer, they were released from prison after 20 years because of pressure. He's right in your face. And I believe he'll come out soon and say, yes, I did kill these little boys and I did get power from it. And I believe that many of his supporters will say, we support you. Look, it worked. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the kind of things that we're coming to in this country. With people like Michael Jackson molesting these little kids, and everyone jokes about it and laughs about it like it's some kind of funny joke. Or even Epstein, like you were saying. It's right in our face. Everyone knows it's going on. The media doesn't question Trump about this, even a hint.
Yeah, the most disappointing thing I've seen is how Christians have latched onto Trump. It's very disappointing.
That's so true. Because when he comes up with that thing, 2 Corinthians, and we can all just sit here and just bat our eyes like he didn't say it.
Yeah, for example, both Trump's son and daughter have gone away from the Christian faith, if you will, and married into Jewish families. And then there's the fact that Donald Trump is on his 3rd marriage. Then there's the fact that much of Trump's empire is built on gambling and avoidance of paying certain bills. And he says certain phrases like, I swear on my mother's Bible. Well, any astute Christian should look at that and sniff some BS. Because why would you come up with that phrase, like my mother's Bible? What, you don't have one of your own? Well,
he says that his mother handed down he's actually shown that Bible to people with his mother's handwriting in it. Yes, he does have his mother's Bible. It's his now.
But but it's just like Donald Trump to do that. Everything is for show. I
agree. Now, what about the theory, though, that all those in power, these elites, that they can only get there because they're servants of Lucifer, and they're using these occult ley lines and all this kind of sacred geometry, all these things you're talking about. Now, obviously, Trump doesn't have a clue about that kind of stuff. He has no clue about. He's never considered these things. He's never considered the issue of abortion. He's never glanced at the Bible. This guy.
Yeah.
Except to look for his mother's signature in there. So now, how do we reconcile that?
That's a brilliant question, and my answer will be this. There was a time when the Rothschilds and Rockefellers were a humble coin dealer and a humble oil cat worker. Okay?
Right.
In other words, you can always trace back the family lineage to a humble, hardworking beginning. But with money comes power, and with power comes corruption. And I find it fascinating that Jesus would say, you cannot serve both God and Mammon. If you do a little digging, you look up that word Mammon, and it has a particular Hebrew context in that it refers to a demonic entity which is associated with gold coins. So there's something spiritual about money. And that if you read into what I just said without me getting into anything more specific, you will soon know the conclusion to my second film, The Illusion of Money.
Very interesting. And, you know, you're right. There's something about Trump with the worship of money, especially when that TV show, The Apprentice, at the end, when they would pick someone, the winner, and they would drop the confetti, it was little dollar bills. Like, how insane is that?
Yeah, you know, people love the cult of celebrity. They love to be associated with money. Like if I were Donald Trump and I were to walk into Mr. Epstein's Caribbean orgy island establishment and I were to see the pedophilic pictures on the wall, I would turn around, walk out, and say, you know, I was at this guy's Caribbean resort. I was there for about 30 seconds. I saw this on the wall, and I turned and walked out. I would state that on the public record. Okay? This is what I saw. But he didn't do that. You know, and everyone who walked into Mr. Epstein's pedophilic palace down there in the Caribbean would have seen those pictures. And they would have known instantly what this place is all about.
Well, wait a second.
They don't do that.
Do you know that the pictures you're talking about that are from the probable cause affidavit? Those are pictures that were in his Palm Beach mansion. No one knows no one knows what the inside of his place in Virgin Islands looks like. The pictures you're talking about, those pictures of the little girls framed, and the little naked girls framed in his mansion, that's in Palm Beach.
Yeah. I mean, it's like people are willfully ignorant, right? I mean, I'll tell you a little personal story. I'm driving around my home city of Winnipeg, and I see someone's home with some large elm trees, and they have cow skulls. Okay. I can't speak for some reason. Cow skulls on the trees. And so, knowing a little bit about the occult, my interest is piqued. So I created some fake reason to go up and speak to the owner of the home. And I'm seeing all kinds of occult paraphernalia in their living room. And I wished them a good day, and I turned around and walked away. And I said, okay, this is a house that obviously has something going on in it. And it's those little signs that if you know what to look for, that really, really tip you off. And it's not something that your human eyes see. It's something that your spiritual eyes see. For example, I was dropping off a computer to be fixed at a store, and parking next to me is this gorgeous woman, young woman, with shoulder-length black hair, wearing a red coat straight out of Vogue fashion magazine on the cover. And I'm not looking at the fact that she's beautifully dressed and is absolutely gorgeous. I'm looking at her with my spiritual eyes, and I'm saying, there's something wrong. There's something wrong. There's something wrong. And she looks at me, and I'm not looking at her. I'm looking through her. And she gets a little bit uncomfortable, gets in her car and drives off. As she's driving off, I see the bumper sticker on her car. It said, "Witches heal." Now you can chalk that up to just pure coincidence. I don't. I mean, the occult is everywhere. I don't want to look for it. Okay, I know it's there. But people are generally willfully ignorant of all the ways the occult affects us. You see, it's not about what you believe, it's what about they believe, because they act on what they believe, and their actions affect you. And when I say they, I mean people in positions of power. And if you're a Christian, you need to pray for people in positions of power. For example, I was visited by my federal politician a year ago, who we had an election in Canada in the fall. And we're supposed to have voter privacy laws in this country. And so my federal politician to-be walks up to my door, and I was on holidays writing my script at the time. And she asks me, "Why did you spoil your vote?" And I looked at her and I said, "How did you know that?" Right? You're not supposed to know that, but she did. And I said, I called her out on that. And I said, "Well, now that you're at my door, let me tell you why I spoiled my vote." And I wrote on my ballot, none of the above, didn't want any of the major national candidates. And I said, "End the war on terror, restore the Bank of Canada." And long story short, the Bank of Canada's history is kind of like the Federal Reserve's history in reverse. The Bank of Canada was started in the early 1930s as a way to get Canada out of the Great Depression. It was started by a federal politician who realized that money creation was a responsibility of the state and not private banks. So the Bank of Canada printed up the money for Canada's involvement in World War II, interest-free. It literally printed up the cash. The Bank of Canada literally printed up the cash for the creation of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which it knew would grow the economy as opposed to inflate the currency or devalue the currency through increased transportation efficiency. And along in 1973 came Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who together with his Bilderberg banker buddy, Gerald Bowie, basically neutered the Bank of Canada. And ever since 1973, Canada has been a victim of Canada's private banks who loan, just like the Federal Reserve in America, who loan the government's the currency to continue to operate at interest. And I find it very ironic that his son, his son is now Prime Minister of Canada. Justin Trudeau is now Prime Minister of Canada. So nothing has changed. I mean, we welcome Syrian refugees with a song based on the song that Muhammad composed when he started chopping off the heads of Christians and Jews. And apparently I'm a cultural bigot if I don't like that.
What do you make of that? Because it seems like the governments are trying to push Islam.
Yes, they are, because leftists love Islam, because they see Islam as a locomotive of cultural destruction. For example, I can show you photographs of feminists in Europe holding up signs saying, we'll trade racists for refugees. In other words, we would rather take in, those feminists would rather take in more people from the Middle East and North Africa than deal with the so-called racists who may not like this. The whole situation is gone completely berserk, and that 98% of all the rapes in Sweden have occurred in the past year and a half by these so-called refugees. And even when these feminists get raped, they apologize to their rapists for not being understanding enough. And they even wear burqas in order to blend in with the new culture of Sweden. I, as an amateur historian, have never, ever seen a cultural subjugation of a nation that is conflict-free. And the only way you can explain this is through the power of propaganda and political correctness. It's just amazing.
Well, okay, I would. Okay. Are you familiar with the death of the SEAL Team 6 members, the ones who went after bin Laden and did the raid on bin Laden, and then they died in that helicopter crash?
Very much so. I follow that, and I find it to be highly suspicious.
Okay, yeah, I had the parents of one of those SEAL Team members on the show, and they described to me something called a ramp ceremony that went on over there in a airport hangar in I guess it was Afghanistan. And when they brought back the bodies of these 30 SEAL Team members who had died in the crash, they allowed a imam to come in and do a prayer over them. And there's a video of this. This actually happened. There's no question this happened. It's been interpreted and everything. And he cursed them. And he cursed them to hell. And he said that, they're infidels and that you cannot fight Islam because we will be victorious every time. Now, so that's really my question. Not about political correctness or stuff like that. It seems to me that the people and the forces of evil, as you describe, are endorsing Islam on a grand scale.
Yes, that's correct, because of what I just said. Islam is being radicalized and is being injected culturally, intentionally, so as to destroy the Judeo-Christian foundation of the Western world. It's being done intentionally.
And for what ends, though?
It's a very good question, and my only answer that I can conclude is you use Islam as a cultural weapon of mass destruction, and then you round up all those who resist and radicalize people as quote-unquote religious extremists. In other words, you use them and then you round them all up.
Okay, now where do you stand on the issue of gun control? Do you believe that the government's out to round up all our guns?
Yes, I do believe that. I do believe that people have the right to self-defense. Jesus told one of his disciples to go get a sword. You wouldn't say that in what was then called Palestine, as far as the Romans were concerned. And a Jew would certainly not be armed in Roman-occupied Palestine. But this is what Jesus said, But then he said, you can't live by the sword. In other words, you can't wield the gun, in our case, as a cultural weapon. It's strictly for self-defense. The Bible also says that he who does not provide for his own household is worse than an infidel. And one of those provisions is self-defense. You don't go looking for trouble, but when trouble finds you, you defend yourself.
But my question is, though, are you one of those that believe that the government is going to round up all our guns and pretty much, go door to door and take everybody's guns? Do away with the Second Amendment and take our guns?
I don't believe it'll come down to that.
Okay.
I believe that the cultural brainwashing will continue, and that the only people who will have guns will be the terrorists.
And which terrorists are those?
Well, it could be anyone. It could be the Muslims. Again, we're generalizing here. For the record, the number one victim of ISIS are Muslims. Okay, we need to acknowledge that. And I am all about avoiding generalizations. We need to discuss what the problem is with precision. And the fact is that if you go to my channel and type in, Leonard Ulrich under YouTube, you will come across a series of videos that I've done, which is called "What is ISIS?" ? Parts 1, Parts 2, and Part 3. And altogether, those 3 series of videos have got about 40,000 views and about a 92% thumbs up rating. So, I mean, I even go into, I show a piece of video from a hospital in Tel Aviv, which is taking care of an ISIS soldier. Now, what is going on here? Well, there are certain elements within Israel that love to give support to ISIS because they want to expand Israel's territory. And the best way to do that, as far as they are concerned, is to get the Muslim world fighting itself. And then when everything is greatly weakened, as it already is now, Israel can step into this power vacuum and claim more territory in the interests of quote-unquote peace and safety. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that all of Israel thinks that way. I am suggesting that some in Israel think that way. Similarly, I know that some in America are absolutely pro-Islamic and would wish that America be entirely Islamic. And I know that some people in your government knowingly and willingly fund this effort in order to destroy, like I said, the Judeo-Christian foundation of America. So, like I said, Islam is being used as a tool of cultural destruction. And then once the controllers feel that Islam has done its job, they will be labeled as quote-unquote religious extremists, and quote-unquote extremist Christians and extremist Jews will be rounded up in that pool of radical extremists and will be eliminated.
Okay. Now, would you have the position that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are CIA creations and funded and created in mercenary type groups that are pretty much under our control?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
For example, in What is ISIS Part 1, a journalist from Al Jazeera is confronting an American general, and he has the declassified press release from 2002 stating that in the wake of the collapse of Al-Qaeda, hint, hint, that another group would rise up within Syria and with Iraq. And the American general had to acknowledge the authenticity and the date of this letter. And you cannot tell me that random, I repeat, random parachute drops of arms and food and other equipment, which is being done so that hopefully arms get to the quote-unquote right side as opposed to the wrong side, just so happen to get into the hands of ISIS. I find it hilarious that ISIS can put on a mile-long convoy and get into all these Toyota Tundra trucks and all these Humvees, and they got Stinger missiles and even American helicopters and American tanks, these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that are all chipped, by the way. Even my free iPhone contains a chip telling the world exactly where the iPhone is. So you cannot tell me that a multi-million-dollar piece of American hardware doesn't have a chip and that the American military doesn't know where all this hardware is. They can just send out a Predator drone, totally automated, to eliminate their hardware so that it doesn't fall into Americans' hands or the enemy's hands. That this is not intentional. This has to be intentional. I mean, is it just a coincidence that ISIS or ISIL or IS or the Levant or whatever they want to call it this week just happens to arise at the exact same time and place where Al Qaeda collapses? I mean, the whole thing is a giant con job, because starting in 2002, hundreds of American servicemen and servicewomen held up signs in full uniform, and they concealed their faces with signs saying, "I will not fight a civil war in Syria on behalf of Al Qaeda." So the planners behind the American military simply rebranded Al Qaeda into ISIS. And I find it hilarious that ISIS is the original acronym for the Israeli Security and Intelligence Service. And I find it more than ironic that some ISIS soldiers are being treated in Israel. The whole thing is a giant intentional setup. It is about who will fund or supply, rather, the oil, or specifically natural gas, to heat Europe. Will it be pro-American / NATO nations, or will it be Russia-Chinese alliance nations? And the whole thing, sir, revolves around the continued support for the almighty US dollar. That is what ISIS is all about.
You notice they never attack Israel either.
No.
Not even once. But
not
okay.
even once. They're next door in Syria. Next door. And they never attack the quote-unquote Great Satan Israel. That lets you know who's in charge. And by the way, if you watch my series, What is ISIS? Parts 1, Parts 2, Parts 3, you will have a Muslim jihadi being interviewed on Memory TV, acknowledging this fact that al-Baghdadi is a tool of the CIA, and that some of his brothers in arms are being treated in Israel. So you've got a Muslim jihadi leader acknowledging it. You couldn't make this up.
Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So, not a couple. We got about 10 minutes left. But now, I noticed that you look at everything in the world from a Christian perspective, correct?
Correct.
And you're anti-communist.
Correct.
Okay, and that's just because the original communists were anti-religion, atheists.
They were anti-Christian.
Okay. That's right, because your theory is that they had synagogues and they protected the synagogues and they were all Jewish. Now, what about socialism and capitalism? Where would you fall into that?
Socialism is communism light. And communism is really, the goals of communism are identical to the goals of the Illuminati. It's just a rebranded Illuminati philosophy where you spread secular atheism and you have really the worship of the state. And of all the political candidates currently involved in the American election, the top four, I would have to say that Bernie Sanders is a true believer. But that doesn't mean I agree with Sanders' philosophy of socialism. For example, I hope everyone understands, I'm from Canada, and I just got a $100 bonus for having perfect attendance at my job in 2015. I'm very thankful for that. But, Mr. Opperman, I want every one of your listeners to understand one thing. I couldn't fill up my vehicle with $100. And that is because of the socialism of Canada. Right off the top, the government takes 40%. So now I've got $60. Then gas is currently, if you do the math, $4.18 US or Canadian per gallon. I can't fill up and then that is because it is heavily taxed. I can't fill up my vehicle for $100 gross. And if you want Bernie Sanders' philosophy, that's exactly what you're going to get. You see, 100 years ago, before the creation of the Federal Reserve, you didn't have income tax. And people today are so conditioned to believe that, well, we need to increase taxation so as to create more roads and schools and hospitals. Well, I ask you, what or who created roads, schools, and hospitals before the Federal Reserve was created? Answer: tariffs on foreign goods. You didn't have an income tax. And as a result, people had 30, 40, 50% more to spend. And as a result, the Christian influence over America was exponentially stronger than it is right now. Christians built 90% of all the hospitals and schools in America because they could afford it. If you want Mr. Sanders' philosophy, you're going to end up spending more, and you're going to be relying more and more on the government. Christianity is also about liberty. For example, Alexis de Tocqueville, a 19th century French statesman, went to America in the 1830s, and he wanted to know why it was that the American Revolution went so well and the French Revolution went so bad. And he concludes his long thesis with these 5 sentences. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. The safeguard of morality is religion, and morality is the best security of law, as well as the surest pledge of freedom. The Americas combine the notions of Christianity and of liberty so intimately in their minds that it is impossible to make them conceive the one without the other. Christianity is the companion of liberty in all its conflicts, the cradle of its infancy, and the divine source of its claims. So we started out our discussion with the way we're going to finish our discussion, which is what's going on with Christianity in America? Why is America crumbling? And the answer is this: because the Christians of America have been lulled to sleep. They have been lulled to believe that there is a government solution to a spiritual problem. That is totally false. There is a spiritual solution to a political problem. There is a spiritual solution to an economic problem. There is a spiritual solution to a social problem, not the other way around. And if it's not the Zionists, it's not the gays, it's not the Muslims that are the problem, it's the asleep Christians who are the problem. And they've been lulled to sleep by people who are incredibly evil, who play them lullabies when really it's nothing but absolute horror.
I wish we had more time, because I would assume you're a capitalist then.
Yes, because even the Bible condones and supports the notion of interest.
Okay, but the system we have right now, especially here in America, where all of the money, like 40% of this country's money goes to 6 people, the heirs of the Walmart family. There has to be a solution to that.
Yes, there is.
Okay,
and the answer is to look at the practices of Jewish finance. Every 7 years, debts were forgiven.
Yeah, right.
And every 7 years, 49 years, all the land went back to the previous owners. That is such a brilliant way of extending credit when needed, and yet reeling it in so as to erase long-term oligarchies that I can't possibly come up with something better. That's brilliant. And I find it ironic that mortgage periods in America used to be limited to 7 years.
You're right. And that concept of the 7-year forgiveness of debt and stuff like that, that would resolve so many of these issues.
That's right.
But now what about inheritance? What did it say in the Bible about inheritance? Because that seems to be a problem, too, that this money keeps changing hands to the same people.
Well, yeah, but that could be discussed at another time. But in the remaining time that we have...
We got 2.5 minutes. Come on, man.
Yeah. The problem is, we can finish with this statement.
Yeah.
We have out-Orwelled Orwell. Freedom is ignorance. Ignorance is strength, and money has become debt. I mean, that is so satanic. Money is issued as a debt, okay? It's not real. It has been divorced from real money, which is gold and silver. And it is the government's job, according to your U.S. Constitution, to issue coins of gold and silver. So if I have an infinite source of money, if I can literally whip out a checkbook and write insane dozens of trillions of dollars, then I always have the power over you. That's the issue. And there's a coterie, a inside circle of people who are associated with this unlimited currency supply that are running the world. And you referenced the Walton family. The Walton family, Sam Walton, was in charge of the Japanese internment camps during World War II.
That's right. I forgot all about that.
So we look at where the money flows. Look where the power flows. And you're sure to find satanic signatures all over it.
Okay, we only have like 30 seconds. How can people find you,
They can find me at nwotruth.org. NWO stands for New World Order. nwotruth.org. You can go to YouTube, type in Leonard Ulrich. That's ULRICH. And subscribe. There's always videos every couple of weeks. There's dozens of hours of content, over dozens of videos. And I'm in the middle of my next film, The Illusion of Money. So that's due this year, and I'm floored by the support from people around the world.
Okay, Leonard Ulrich, thank you so much.
You're welcome.